past year or so, dual lane actually has just, like, the laning phase doesn't even exist. At a competitive level, if you get to dual lane first, you just win clear. Like, you'll just outpush people, and that's it. Like, there's no counterplay in lanes, there's not much else. Like, if you get to the lane first, unless the other team has, like, a Sobek or something that can punish you for pushing up to the tower line to auto-attack the wave as it meets, you just win the laning phase. And Golden Bow made that even more annoying because now they didn't even have to blow abilities on the wave to clear it. Like, now the Hunter could just auto-attack it, the Guardian would have all their abilities, the Hunter would have all their abilities, so you couldn't even ability trade with them because they still had everything. You couldn't even punish them for using everything on the wave because now they're not using anything on the wave. So I think this is a great change. It'll allow high-res to balance the weaker early clear gods such as a Shablanque or something like that a lot better, while allowing gods with strong clear in the early game, like an AMC or an ETH, to have their chance to be played. Because in the current meta, there's almost no reason to pick, well, there is no reason to pick an AMC, and there's no reason really to pick something like a Neith unless you want the global ult, because her clear just doesn't matter. Like, in the past, people would pick Neith solely for the clear, and it's kind of just useless now. That was her biggest strength, and Golden Bow took it away because now something like a Shablanque could compete with the clear of something like a Neith, when in the past that was probably the biggest margin of difference between the Hunter class that there was. Overall, I just think it'll be better for the future of the game. For right now, you will see less gods be played in dual lane, unfortunately, as far as the Hunter role goes, but they did touch on it a little bit in the description. You'll see a lot more Guardians, because now Guardians that clear better will help out their Hunters a lot more. It might be hard to tell because the high clear Guardians were always in the meta anyways, like a Sobek or something. Good laning gods were still in the meta. But this does help out those gods in case games go to late game, because now their early clear could make a difference. I don't know, I think that's my thoughts on that. We'll just have to see how it plays out. I think it's a good change. People are still very split on it, but I like it. Heartseeker. Heartseeker's passive was not providing enough power to justify buying it. By allowing the plus 40 power to persist for 3 seconds, this item will provide much more of a punch to players who can land many attacks in rapid succession. So, new passive, hitting an enemy with a basic attack helps you gain focus, increasing attack speed by plus 3% per stack, max 5 stacks. At 5 stacks, your next ability cast consumes the stacks and provides an additional 40 physical power buff for 3 seconds. I think it's still a weird item to build. It is good to have... Actually, it might not be weird anymore. It might just be overstated. Heartseeker's in this weird place where it's such a low-cost item that it's either just not good enough to build in a 6-slot build, or it's so good early game that you're just going to build it all the time. I'm not sure where it's going to fall, but it is hard to maintain those stacks or take advantage of them in a team fight, but if you're stacking it as like a jungler off every jungle camp you clear, and then you just start an engagement, it might be very, very strong. It'll be interesting to see how that item plays out. I don't think I could definitively say whether it's good or not. Runic Hammer. Previously the worst item in the game, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out there. New passive, aura. Enemies who are within 20 units of you and are slowed take 10% more damage from all sources. This basically gives gods like warriors, for example, gives them more utility in their kits. It gives warriors a late game purpose beyond just, or it just gives them a late game purpose in general. A lot of warriors fall off really, really hard late game. Gods like Ravana, gods like Chaac. I think this is probably the coolest application on Chaac, because now your 3, his rain dance or whatever the heck it's called, his slow, now has more utility for your team. Not only is it a slow, it'll increase their damage that the enemy takes, so I think that's a good way to give warriors a little more utility, and it's an interesting item. I'm not sure if it's good enough, but utility on items is always good. It adds more counterplay in the game in general, and that's what makes the game fun to play, so I like that change a lot. Genshi's Guard, updated visual effects when triggered. Okay. Spectral Armor. Ghost Walk was an interesting ability, but attaching it to an expensive physical protection item from... Okay, so, I'm not going to read all of that. Basically, Spectral Armor, the old passive, wasn't good because you would have to burn inactive to get through an Odin cage. They added the Relic Phantom, so there's no use for the passive. It's just a worse Phantom in almost every scenario. So now, new passive, when you activate a relic, your cooldowns are reduced by 3 seconds. This effect can only occur once every 30 seconds. This is basically purification beads from last season, the cooldown reset portion of it, put onto an item. So, this is probably not going to affect it won't affect mages or hunters at all, I don't think. I don't think you're ever going to build this as a mage or hunter. Junglers, warriors, and supports all get a buff with this item, I think, because now you can do something like use an entire Kepri kit or a dash taunt as Athena, and then like give your team a heavenly or a sprint, I guess rather, and then you can get your dash taunt 3 seconds earlier. It can increase your CC output. It can make you safer if you need your escape. It gives you more damage if you want to blow more cooldowns. I think that's going to be an extremely powerful item in certain situations. I don't know if it'll be auto-bought, but you can tell that there's a lot of relic synergy because, before we get to god changes, there's a lot of relic synergy now where you can get the Spectral Armor passive, where it reduces your cooldowns if you use a relic. You can get the Ritual Dagger, which makes your relics last 50% longer, and you could basically just get into this state where you could get these high, like, I don't know what to call it other than like tempo plays. You could get these really high efficiency plays by building those items and just having 2 really good teamfight actives, and you could just hard engage on a fight and have more cooldowns than the enemy and have better teamfight actives than the enemy. And it just is a huge buff to teamfight play, so I would expect to see a lot of supports play with this item. Warriors and junglers to a lesser extent, but I think if you're a god like, I don't know who a good example is, a god like Thor maybe, who has CC in his kit and obviously has a double tap and he's a very ability-based jungler, and people normally build something like a breastplate on Thor. So, for example, a normal build you would see on Thor would be boots into Jotuns into breastplate into like a void shield or something like that. Now you could see something like boots into Jotuns into Spectral Armor, and then you could get a different cooldown option, maybe like what's the one item called? Hydra's Lament or something. You could get that. You could get Spirit Robe if you need cooldown reduction. You could get Mantle of Discord. You could get Genji's Garb. There's a lot of other cooldown options that I think you're going to see Spectral Armor be picked up in a defensive jungler build or someone like a Thor, because there's so many cooldown options that you don't need something like a breastplate anymore when you have a better passive like that on Spectral Armor. So I would expect to see this item a lot. In the god changes, a Muzen Cab, AMC has seen an increase to his early game and clear to solidify his position as a hunter with powerful lane clear but limited mobility. Finally, AMC gets a good change. The clear is a big deal. This helps us clear a lot. Being able to use 2 abilities on the wave will give him way more clear than a hunter like a Hoye, who can only clear the wave with 1 ability. It'll put his clear more in line with gods, kind of like an Uller. And I don't know what other hunter has really good clear. Neith obviously will have really good clear. So this is something that I think will be also a product of the Golden Bow nerf, or removal rather, was that something like AMC is just completely useless. Like, why would you ever pick AMC for early game clear when you could pick Shablanke and keep up with his clear just as much, have an escape that's CC immune, and have a global halt? Like, there was no reason to ever pick AMC, but now with the removal of Golden Bow, holy crap. With the removal of Golden Bow, early game clear hunters will have they'll just have a more defined role, and they'll give you a reason to pick something like an AMC. If you need that early game clear, or you're trying to snowball a lead, picking something like an AMC might not be bad, and you might not care about the fact that he doesn't have any mobility, because you're just going to get so far ahead that you're just going to have pressure on the map anyways, and you don't have to worry about ganks and stuff like that. So, I think this is a really nice change for AMC. Also, the general change, AMC's basic attacks offset distance has been reduced. If you haven't played AMC much, that might not seem like a big deal, But I think for a lot of professional hunter players, AMC was always really weird to play whenever he was in the meta, because you would constantly be adjusting your feel of the game based on which god you're playing, because the auto attacks would feel so different when you played AMC because they would be so offset to the left. Now they're pretty straight out of the middle of his body, so he'll be more accurate for most players who aren't used to playing him, and he'll have better early clear, and Golden Bow isn't a thing, so now you actually have a reason to pick him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with AMC. Anubis. Anubis has a focused kit that relies on high damage output and pinpoint crowd control. With the changes to Mummify and Death Gaze, these strengths are highlighted, allowing Anubis to have more control over the fights he commits to. So earlier when I was talking about, I'm just going to go back to it really quick. Earlier when I was talking about Golden Bow, I was talking about how I think it's a good change because it was a band-aid fix and it just gave every god the same ability in the early game. And it countered some of their points like this. Like, Anubis, his strengths are that he has a single target crowd control and a crap ton of damage. So you don't change Anubis by now giving him a leap or something to to make up for his weaknesses. You just highlight his strengths, and I think that's a better way to balance the game, and that's why I like removing Golden Bow. And they stay with that theme with Anubis. They increase his base movement speed, so now he is a little more mobile. He can juke abilities a little easier. He can farm a little bit easier. Previously, if you had lane pressure with an Anubis and the other team had a Janus, like, it wouldn't even matter if the Janus got out-cleared by the Anubis, because the Janus would just go through the jungle quicker with his portals and his 3, and he would just out-farm the Anubis anyways, which kind of sucked. So, increasing the base movement speed helps that a lot. More CC is always good. It gives him the option. You can probably use your Mummify 2-3 times in a fight before you die now, whereas before you would use your Mummify, and if somebody would dive after you engaged on them, if someone would dive you after you engaged on them, you would never have this cooldown up and you would just die. That kit's helped a little bit. I don't know if it'll completely change that, but it's just a nice change. Increasing the radius of Death Gaze is a huge deal. It gives Anubis more area of effect damage. It punishes teams for stacking up in CC more. So now you could actually see synergy with certain Guardians. Like, for example, if I play Athena and I taunt and I have an Anubis mid, my taunt is going to group up 2 people, and now the Death Gaze will much easier, whatever, screw you guys, I can't do words. It'll be able to hit 2 targets much easier. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, that's actually a pretty big radius increase, and if you guys want to see it, you should check it out on Hi-Res TV on stream whenever you get a chance on the VOD, and it's a pretty big change. And I think Anubis could see some play, so that's a good change. I like that a lot. Kuang. Kuang can burst down gods in a variety of situations. Screw the text, Kuang was OP as fuck. They decreased his burst damage. His 3 was his biggest, was his main damage spell, I guess. It was just so insane that he could 2-3 somebody and just basically kill them if you had Soul Reaver and Polynomicon active. So I think the obvious side is they reduced his burst, right? I think the bigger change with this is that this was the ability that you maxed first. And previously, Kuang had really, really good jungle clear, because you would go Purple Pot, and you would max this ability, and it had super high scaling, and you would be able to clear super quick, and Kuang would be able to farm. And with Kuang's kit, he's a late game hyper carry, and if you allow a late game hyper carry to farm really easily, they'll get to late game quicker, they'll be way more reliable, and they end up being overpowered in some situations. And I think that's where you saw Kuang get to. By nerfing this ability particularly, you nerf his early jungle clear, which means he can't farm as well. He can't farm as well, and he has less burst damage, so now not only is he toned back in terms of being able to one-shot people, but it'll take him longer to be able to get close to one-shotting people. So all around, I think that's a really good Kuang change. He'll still be a good god, he'll still be viable, but I don't think he'll be insanely overpowered, and he might not need to get banned every single game, but that will depend. So many other things in this patch change that it's hard to say whether Kuang will still be a top jungler or not, but I think in general this change just helps him not be as overtuned as he was. Arachne. So basically, this is a web rework. The previous Arachne web would just be like a little horizontal line skill shot that you could place wherever you want. I believe you could place it over walls as well. Now it's a projectile, so